So again, welcome everyone that's here. We try and do sort of a few of these a year, and there's three things that we try and sort of focus on. So one is exploring new ideas. The other one is gaining some knowledge and experience from others as we work through this, but also how can we add to the community and how do we bring folks together? And you can probably argue, even though it's more challenging at this time, it's probably more important that folks get together, either as we are today or remotely. So feel free to hang around afterwards and have a conversation with folks. It's about how we all come together. So for security, so we thought about the event for this one for security, and we thought security is front of our minds, either from a practitioner perspective or a vendor perspective before COVID. But what COVID does is give a slightly different flavour to it. And we were particularly interested in, how does mass proliferation of remote working, different ways of working with contractors and different operational models, how that might influence things as well. So although COVID won't be a key component of what we're talking about today, we're sort of trying to weave it into some of the experiences and so forth over the last couple of months. So I'll just move quickly to our esteemed panel that we have assembled here today. So we were thinking about three sort of groups. So firstly, those who are fighting the good fight on the front line and with their organisations and using different technologies and people and processes and policies to bring their security stance together. So in that light, we've got Arlene White, who's the CEO of Education Payroll, and Simon McKay, who's from General Manager at TAB. So welcome to you. And then we thought we'd bring along some security experts, and they certainly win the Best Here Award, I think, that we've got here as well today. So Simon Howard, who's the owner and technical manager of ZX Technologies, and Declan Ingram, who's deputy director at CERT. So welcome to you. And then lastly, we've got some people who provide some of the technology and some of the frontline experiences as well. So I'd like to welcome, I'll just turn around to Ben. So this is Ben Casey here, who's from the BeyondCorp division of Google. So welcome, Ben. And we were particularly intrigued with their zero trust approach they've got to security. So Ben will talk a bit about that as we go through. And finally, Corinne Balmain. So Corinne is with us at Fronde and is our Google practice manager, who's well experienced in how do we roll these out and some of the people change management aspects that we go through as well. So welcome, Ben and Corinne.
Thank you.
So in terms of the format for this evening, so fairly simple. Firstly, grab a drink and grab a seat and get relaxed. For those who are online, we've got a contingent online as well. I hope you're well fortified for the next hour or so. We'll be working through a series of Q&A, and for that I will hand over to my colleague Steve Cowper, otherwise known as Skippy, the one with the odd accent in the room tonight. So Skippy will lead the panel through a series of Q&A, and then we'll open the floor and online for Q&A at the end. So that's sort of the rough agenda for the evening. So without further ado, Skippy, I shall hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panellists and the audience for joining us this evening. And look, if I set a little bit of a scene as to why we brought this event together, globally we're about 20 years into a cloud journey. If we look back to where the foundations of cloud computing were established, and that's brought about an accelerated rate of change that doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. And through that, organisations are leveraging different types of technology in different locations, and that's perpetually shifting. And to be able to deliver on programs for those businesses, we're bringing together different types of talent. So we have our full-time employees, we have contractors, we have partners, and we're more often now working in different locations than just in the office. And even further from that, at an experience level for people, we're expecting to be able to work from any device. So all of those elements coming together is really changing the security profile for organisations. And we felt that it was important to come together and to look at what it meant to be match fit with your security approach in new ways of working, and especially as new normal is continuously reinvented. So where I'd like to start today is from a little bit of a customer view with Arlene and Simon here. And The first question I have for you both is how has the cybersecurity conversation changed at a leadership table over the last few years for you? And I might pass over to you, Arlene, first.
Thanks, Steve. Am I supposed to take this? I thought you were going to hold it for me too. No, it's okay. I can hold it. No, thanks for the opportunity, Steve, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. The conversation around cyber, I think, is probably a second order question. For me, it's the conversation around security, full stop. When you run an organization like Education Payroll, where we have the largest payroll in Australasia and pay 100,000 teachers fortnightly and a $5.6 billion government expenditure, you probably think maybe security should be number one on your list. And it is, and it has been for ever since I took over the role 2.5 years ago. But the level of interest around government, certainly in Wellington, probably heated up quite a bit just over a year ago when third-party providers were being attacked, and Heritage New Zealand and a few other big players around town were really struggling and had compromised their portals, their web portals, everything that they had were compromised. But EPL had a plan, and we had a plan. Well, certainly since I've been there, but I'm going to say 18 months, we decided that we were going to invest in modern technology so that didn't matter what hit us, we would be able to have a business continuity plan that would allow us to work from any device, anywhere, at any time. And we've executed that plan. So when COVID hit, the Friday before we went into lockdown, I sent all my staff home because we had to protect the pay, knew the money still had to be given to the teachers the following week. And so when the Prime Minister shut everybody down, we were already running the pay. And without a glitch. The only glitch we actually were concerned about were the actual pay administrators in schools. That's another whole issue about serving your customer. We have about 6,700 pay administrators and principals that actually input into our system, and there's no way I could guarantee that they were working on a device or that they had the right security on their remote device that wouldn't compromise our system. So we had to beef up a little bit and make sure that we were able to monitor that and do checks and trust the system. So I'll be really interested to hear Ben talk about that zero trust, because quite frankly, our vulnerability is still with those pay administrators. We don't know what they do, and we don't know. They have been caught out from phishing scams and responding to emails and all sorts of things they're not supposed to do. But we can't monitor that. But yet it certainly challenges us at the other end to make sure that they say they are when they try to come in and execute the pay for their particular school.
And Simon, you've recently come to New Zealand and held senior leadership roles, both in Australia and New Zealand. How has the conversation changed for you over the last few years at that senior table?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I've traditionally worked with fast-paced organisations. I like to call them startups. You may know a brand called MYOB. That, in my mind, acted like a startup. So I've worked with a lot of agile organisations, and one of the keys there is that I don't think in my career there's been any robust conversations around security at the board table or at the senior management level. Certainly tech guys are really focused on it and really concerned about it. And I'll draw in this conversation from 3 or 4 organisations I've worked with who will remain nameless. But in those organisations, I would have senior managers who would come to me and say that they wanted business access and business priority first, even ahead of security concerns. And I know that when I would speak at board level and talk about an investment in security, then there wasn't a real appetite for that. So I think most business people see it as a thing to be looked after by technology. And we know there's some bad actors out there, and we know there's some phishing attacks, and people will click on a bad email from now and then. But I've been stolen from 5 times that I know about, 2 in the physical world and another 3 in organisations. One company I was at, overnight, we had 400 client sites that we had built hacked, and we had probably about 100 domain names transferred out before we caught it. And that was because I worked in an organisation that was all about focus to execution and commercial reality. I've had another large financial organisation that I've worked for where we would, and this may not be a big number to some, but when I discovered it, I thought it was a big number, and certainly our business owners thought it was a large number. We would get around 35,000 emails a month, which were basically blocked from the system. We did a lot of financial transactions using email, which is fraught with a whole lot of danger, and yet the board and the senior management were very happy to use email. Our clients, which were large financial organisations, insisted on the ability to use email to send information back forward, orders, etc. And they preferred that because all of their people who worked for them used email, were happy with it, and yet it was full of security issues. So we would quite often get spear phishing, emails coming from the chief executive asking for things to be done. So from my perspective, security is really about human layer security. And certainly in one organisation I worked with, we made an effort to send out emails on a weekly basis talking about the bad guys and all the exciting and interesting things that were happening. And if I look back on that, stuff that's happening in the cyber world is no different to what it was like when you went to Europe in the 80s or 90s. People kids would run up to you with cardboard and hold it up to your face and say, "Can you give some money here?" Meanwhile, they'd duck around and try to grab your money belt. So it's all about deception, right? And so I worry that when we send a whole lot of people home, that how easily they could be deceived, and making sure that our posture's in place to handle that. But in short, I know that in my experience, it's not easy for me to get a business case to spend at board level or senior management level, because they're worried about, well, how much money do I need to spend? What's the return? It's like insurance. Will it ever pay off? And if it slows me down commercially, then I'll take the risk. So that's my perspective on the world here.
I think that's really disappointing to hear, because as a citizen, as a taxpayer, and as everything else coming to this country, I truly believe that it's our responsibility as chief executives, and certainly I sit at my board table, to make sure that they don't put that as their first priority. My board is 100% behind our cybersecurity plan, and they have invested and approved the investment heavily, and I don't think it's because I'm just a nag at the table. Well, maybe it is. I should ask them sometime probably, but as an executive and as a public servant, I honestly believe that's my responsibility to convince the board, and I've never tried to shirk that responsibility. So I'm sad to hear that others don't reciprocate or feel that way, because there's nothing more important than protecting your asset. There just isn't. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's exactly why we're here. And look, I'd ask you both to reflect on and share with us a little bit about how you responded to the lockdown process. Did it have an impact on your ability to operate and balance operations with your security profile as you rapidly had to shift your employees to remote work? And I might throw back to you, Simon.
So in my current role, I'm much more, I feel I'm a lot more protected. So we were very fortunate that we'd actually rehearsed a lot of BCP before the event. And that part of my learning in my career is that I actually had a fire in a building once, and we all dutifully evacuated. The fire was actually beneath us and didn't affect our office. So everybody walked out, they left all their laptops and everything behind. And we were 4 days before we were allowed back in that office. So, and that was a major impact, because I was a CEO at the time, and, we had to hit targets. We had to make sure our sales kept coming in. We had to keep operating. And 4 days without operation across 120 people was a big hit. So that learning meant from there that every organisation I've gone into, I've rehearsed BCP, and I've forced people to work from home before they've had to. So at the TAB, we've got a very good security posture. For a long time, we've had G Suite in place, and we're able to seamlessly just work from home. So, but listening to others out there, one of the major banks I spoke to in a forum just this last week, all their corporate employees are now working from home, and their biggest concern is that they now have individuals that they need to look after who protect them against themselves, and they're working in 3 environments. We've got our work environment, we've got our home environment, and we've got our play environment. And those 3 environments are mashed into one when you've got individuals working at home. And to be able to delineate between I'm at work, or I'm at home, or I'm gaming, or watching video, or whatever I might be doing, is actually consciously swapping between those. When I'm go to work and come home, there's a delineation between the 2 places. But I'm very lucky that where we are now, we've got a tech team who's used to working remotely, and we've practiced it often. And we've made sure that with our G Suite implementation that we've had all that security put in place. So the issue when I talk about at board level and senior management is for some of the organisations I've worked in the past, that recognition wasn't there. I think it's getting more play now because we're hearing more about attacks from great, national players. This is becoming the new global warfare and the psychology warfare. You just need to see what happened with the election in the US and the whole Brexit thing, is that cybersecurity also extends into, psychological warfare as well. So it's a big space.
Thanks. We, as I said, were able to hit the ground running because of the investment we made. But it was interesting at the time we run the payroll. It's batch processing fortnightly. So our actual pay processing people, and I'll give a plug to Fronde here because you guys are a big part of the pay processing cycle. We had already largely allowed our people to work from home to run the pay during batch because it runs on the weekend. It's the most convoluted process, and it's taken me a while to understand it, but so we knew that we could run the pay from home, but the actual input into the change on a fortnightly basis where we have to key in changes to people's pay, we hadn't tested that in a remote environment. So we did need to get some VPNs, and we needed to get some laptops all ready to farm out to our staff. Some of them had left the building without taking their laptops, so we had to have a system where we could deliver the laptops, and because it's such a massive undertaking, they need dual screens to do the work. It really did become an equipment nightmare. So we had a lot of logistics in that space, but it was amazing how quickly we were able to get all of that stuff delivered and run the first week we had a pay, and we ran it without a glitch, and everyone got paid. The interesting part in all of that as well is, as you can imagine, the government very worried about a lot of things during COVID, but the minister asked me 3 times if I could guarantee that the pay would run, because he didn't want 100,000 teachers phoning him and saying they needed a paycheck. And I guaranteed him all 3 times that we would run the pay, and I was pretty sure we could do it. But I was glad that I'm very relieved when it happened. The other thing that was really interesting for me was the tech team. And again, I know people take tech for granted, and I don't. At least, I hope I don't. But they too rose to the occasion, and we had a number of projects on the go, and we're building a new user interface for school administrators, and we're doing lots of stuff, and we do it agile. So we had we were in sprints, and we needed to get things done, and we needed to explore some of the tools that we had that could facilitate that. So we had just installed Microsoft 365, Teams, and everything became a Teams the way we would consult and the way we would collaborate on Teams, which worked really, really well, again, without a glitch. So we were able to stay in touch with everybody regularly and know what each other was doing. And we had our stand-ups, our Kanban sessions in the morning were by Teams. Pretty cool. We even ran a PI planning event on Teams. So we were able to do all of that and in a secure environment. So I was really comfortable with that. And the other thing that I don't think anyone else has done, maybe I'm wrong, no one else was perhaps risky enough to do it. We did a full DR during the COVID lockdown. That means we switched from our Wellington data center to Auckland and back again during the lockdown remotely, and nothing went wrong. I still can't believe it. When they told me we were going to go ahead and do it, I almost said no. We'll wait till we get back. But I trusted my tech team. I trusted Fronde, who was an incredible help. during the DR. I know it was a lot of pressure on you guys as well, but you stood up and you did it for us. So I'm really, really proud of the fact that we didn't let the scariness of COVID stop us from our BAU. I do wonder, when you talk about preparedness and BCPs, in a country, I landed here in 2012 and we were just over trying to get our Christchurch staff back in an office after the earthquakes. We had my staff at IR in 80 offices. Then we went through Kaikoura in 2014, and again, the same thing. We had all of our laptops sitting on a loading dock down on Featherston Street. And I kept saying to myself, why aren't we better ready for crises in this country? I mean, we've had 2 major outages of our BAU, and yet when the pandemic hit, there were so many places around that weren't ready. I don't understand that, and I will never understand that. And if I challenge anybody to make sure your BCP is ready for the next crisis, because there will be one.
I think it's really interesting. We've got 2 organisations that are cloud enabled with 2 of the biggest productivity and collaboration suites. And look, I'll actually reach out to Corinne here. Corinne is part of the Fronde team that helps organisations shift to cloud collaboration suites. And Corinne, the mic's not working. Yeah. I'll pass this mic over to you. First question is, what's the difference you've seen in the ability of cloud workers to be able to adapt to remote work? Because we've heard from both Simon and Arlene that was a big piece in being able to be reactive to the situation.
Thank you. So I think the big thing was companies who had already embraced the cloud, invested in it, say pre-COVID, they were able to kind of maintain that productivity. So one thing that I did notice, and it was purely out of curiosity, is I checked our productivity suite. So with the suite that we use, I'm able to check dashboards, and I'm able to have a look at kind of the statistics of how people are consuming the product. And what I found, it was interesting, but I also wasn't surprised, is our level of productivity using that suite stayed the same. It didn't spike. The only difference was we saw a small increase in video conferencing, as you would expect, but there really wasn't a spike with that productivity. And I think it was because this is always the way that Fronde has worked. Nothing was really different for us. We've always been able to work from anywhere, from any device, and so that was really refreshing to see. And probably, to Simon's point, when you talked about the fire, we actually had a similar thing when the Fronde office was on the waterfront, and we had an earthquake, and we had to evacuate. We couldn't take anything with us. We weren't allowed back into the building, but we were still able to continue to work. And also, during the kind of the lockdowns that we had, because once again, this is the way we've always been able to work, we've still been able to deliver projects to our customers, during COVID. We've still been able to actually kick off new projects and also close them down. And the refreshing part is, we still have that peace of mind of security of our information and also our customers' information. So that's been really, really positive.
And we have another microphone. So what I would like to ask you is, where have you seen, I guess, more legacy approaches to remote security access be a barrier to remote work, and what impact does that have on employees?
So it's a really interesting question, because we're all here because security is important, but sometimes security can actually negatively impact people, your staff, users. And it can go from anyone who's an office worker through to DevOps, through to legal and more. So sometimes, depending on the way that the security has been constructed within organisations, it actually limits the way that people can access that information. An example could be that there's laptops, but they're unable to actually access their information remotely because they didn't have the specific piece of software that's sitting on there. So that's kind of one area that can also negatively impact end users. The other part is, depending on how the security model has been constructed within organisations, it can actually lead to end user frustration. And that frustration can be also causing some constraints or restraints, between relationships of me as an end user or as an office worker through to the IT department. Now, unfortunately, frustration and that relationship not being very healthy can actually lead to, and I'm sure you've all seen it, but it can lead to other people finding ways to become more productive because the security is currently constraining them.
Very good. Look, I think we might move on to a bit more of a broader security landscape view. And Simon and Declan, you're both very deep in how organisations respond and adapt and change their security posture. Look, I might start with Declan there. If you look back pre-COVID and consider the adoption of cloud services, remote working, BYOD, what trends have you been seeing at a national level in cybersecurity?
I think in terms of that technological adoption, it was certainly ad hoc. Most organisations had the capacity and the capability to do remote working, but not everyone at once. CERT is a part of MB, and a big part of our BCP was to be able to use another MB office. I hadn't expected all of them to be closed at once. We also, just talking about what we've done as an organisation, we're a old school physical tin, data centre, private cloud, whatever, but, we were not set up for remote working at all. And like everyone else, we had 2 days to work it out, right? And we did. In terms of the trends that we saw from a wider security perspective, I'm going to focus in on people because as a technologist, the one thing that I have learnt at CERT, so in case there's anyone that's wondering what this sort of thing is called CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team, we are response, coordination and assistance centre for every person, organisation, large and small, in New Zealand. So people report their security incidents to us. They have a bad day, ransomware, they get hacked, they lose money, whatever it is, they call us up, we try and help. We do help. Sometimes it's the challenge. So we get to see a huge amount of the badness. And the one thing that I learned as a technologist was the fact that it is people. It is 100% about people. Most of the incidents that are reported to us, it is the person that, the subject of the attack is the person, not the system. We still get malware. We get a lot of ransomware that just, technical security vulnerabilities, exploitation, all of that goodness, all of that still happens, but mostly it's the people. And so one of the simplest things that people will do when they see something, so like an email comes through, it's a little bit weird. They'll turn to the person in the pod next to them and go, "Hey, did you get this? What's this all about? Is this real? Like, should I open this attachment? I wasn't, like, what's going on here? That looks odd." And I don't know if anyone's read this book, but there's a book called The Cuckoo's Egg that was written in the 70s by a guy called Clifford Stoll. And he was an astronomer that discovered a 13-cent accounting error on his mid-range computer. And he wanted to find out why, and he couldn't let it go. And he ended up pulling the thread on this and finding this like amazing international Russian hacking craziness, right? If you haven't read it, 100% go and read it. Absolutely amazing. And that's how incidents are discovered, by a person looking at something and going, is this right? I'm gonna pull this thread and go down that path. So one of the things that we were really concerned of in COVID was the fact that people wouldn't have those resources available to them. Obviously, there's all sorts of great productivity tools, VC, everything else, but that social thing could have been broken. And we saw a bit of that. We saw a huge spike. We saw a big spike in phishing emails that were targeting, here is our new working from home solution, click on here, or blah, 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 or, all of that kind of themed phishing thing that you would expect. And in terms of the other trends of what we're seeing, around the world, there is a lot of people, sorry, I don't have COVID, I promise. There's a lot of, sorry, it's a bad taste joke. There's a lot of people around the world that are technically capable, used to having a high income, now they don't have a job and they've still got a hungry family. And that's, like, we've seen a huge thing over the past, and this is not just immediately, but over the past few years, like a huge uptick in financially motivated crime around computers. And unfortunately, I think that this is not going to go away. There's been some big ticket items in the media recently, like ransomware that used to be $100 or $300 to get your system back is now $1 or $3 million, right? It's pretty serious business. And once you have that level of cash flow going into a criminal organization doing this, they can make that investment, they can make their systems better, they can go cloud, they can have all of the productivity tools that we can have. And suddenly that arms race is not in our favor. So unfortunately, it's not a great, happy story, but that's the world as I see it at the moment.
We've got AML to thank for that. They had to find their money somewhere else.
That's right. From your perspective, Simon, have you seen a change in the way that malicious actors are targeting workers? Predominantly through this global shift to remote work? Are there any particular trends that have changed?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of really simple ways that organisations get compromised. So during lockdown, we picked up a new customer and they'd been a victim of ransomware. And so we went to figure out what had happened. And the attackers had, the company had gone from like 15 people remotely accessing the company systems to 300. And a number of them had really poorly configured passwords. So I think we did an assessment and 13 people had welcome 1 as a password, and maybe 16 people had password 1 as a password. And so from an attacker's perspective, it's not really technically difficult to gain access to that organization when you just look at who works there, or just try Christian names and then try password 1 against all of them until the door opens, and then you install your ransomware and you're away laughing. I had a friend just recently, runs a small optometry practice in Dunedin, and again, not a super technically advanced, sophisticated hack. His IT provider left some remote administration software open to the internet, again with a really poor password on it. They ransomwared his computer. All his records for all his clients were on there. He didn't know where patients were turning up. He didn't know what bookings were coming in the future. He couldn't check the historical medical records of his patients. So he was in a really bad place. Now, he had cyber insurance. Who here has got cyber insurance? Hands up. Yeah, not many people. So he thought he was sweet. He had cyber insurance. Everything was going to be gravy. His machine had been ransomwared. They were asking for 1 Bitcoin, small business, 4 staff. That's quite a lot. That's $17,500. So he was like, sweet, let's get out my insurance and pay this ransom. He then checked the clause on his insurance, and he didn't have the line item that says also will pay ransom. So he could get all his machines rebuilt, but still he had no files. So we then went through the process of purchasing a Bitcoin for him, and then AML came into play. You can only transfer $10,000 a day into the bad person's wallet, so we had to do it in increments. But yeah, he had one of the most stressful months of his life with his business crippled, and then $20,000 or $18,000 out of pocket. So they're not really sophisticated attacks, these ones, like the way that people are getting in. And that's the over the internet one. Then there's the clicking on stuff one that users receive, which is the other vector. One of the things that has been changing, however, instead of asking for the ransom to decrypt your files, the ransomware authors might say, well, we're going to leak these files on the internet unless you pay the ransom. So that's a slight difference. And there's one crew operating, they're called Evil Corp, I think. And the Americans know who they are, a Russian crew. They've got photos of them, FBI wanted stickers all up over the place. And in the US, if you pay ransom to these folks, it's a federal crime because they're on some like do not pay list. So Garmin were actually affected by this crew, and Garmin paid the ransom. And surely they'd be in a little bit of trouble with the DOJ. But it turns out they used a French incident response company as their broker, who weren't subject to the same laws, perhaps. We'll soon find out. And then got their files back, and not leaked everywhere on the internet. Who's not to say that crew won't then go and release it in 6 months' time unless you pay another $1 million?
So there's two themes coming out from both of you here of people are a perpetual problem, and actually the simple attacks seem to be quite effective on mass. And look, we've got more and more sophisticated technologies and capabilities for malicious people to hit us with, but I'd be interested to get your feedback on, do you see the trend to continue to be the simple human-orientated attack at scale?
I think until everyone's got two-factor authentication turned on, like if the stuff continues to work, then they'll continue to do it.
This is something I have really strong feelings about. People are only the problem because the technology that we give them to do their job isn't fit for purpose. And I had a robust conversation with a security architect where I suggested that everyone in their organization, the goal should be everyone in their organization can open any email, any attachment, browse any website, because that's what their job requires. And it's up to us as technologists to give them a platform so that they can safely do their job. And if you give someone a car and you say, this is your car, every now and again you're going to put your foot on the accelerator and it's going to blow up, and you just have to know which one it's going to be and when that's going to happen, that's so unfair. I go through and look at, so we have a system to collect phishing emails and analyze them and pull out the badness and do a whole bunch of stuff. And I've been in InfoSec for 20 years. I have probably looked at tens of thousands, deep dived on tens of thousands of phishing emails. And for most of the ones that I look at, you cannot tell the difference. And half of them, there is no difference because it's exactly the same style sheets that were taken off M365 or whatever it is that people are being phished for. So it is actually impossible for the user to do that. And it's so, so important for us. Like Simon talking about two-factor authentication, 100% not foolproof. There's always a way around everything. But it's just so incredibly important to do that. And as we're designing systems, like understand that our staff, our people are like water, right? They're here and they have to flow down to what they need to do to get their job done. If we put obstacles in the way, if we make people jump through hoops and do dumb stuff, they're just going to have to find a way around it to get their job done to go home. And we need to keep that in mind when we're designing systems so that the path that they take to do it is the right path. It's the secure path. It's the path that we want them to go down.
So just kind of following on from what Declan said as well is, depending on how your security is actually set up is really what you're asking your employees to do is risk assessment on should I, to your point, should I open this email? So depending on how that's set up, that's actually what we're asking people to do now is not only their jobs, but also risk assess, should I be opening this? Should I be forwarding this? Those types of things. So we really need to make sure that, security from an end user point of view is seamless and it's easy to kind of access that information as well and do their job.
Now that sounds like a great point to head across to our esteemed guest over in Sydney, Ben Casely. And Ben, we've really got you here representing the development of BeyondCorp as an approach to zero trust. What I'd love you to start with is, what is this zero trust thing that we speak of, and why is that different to previous security models?
Yeah, thanks very much. I've been listening intently, so you can hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, so look, Google's approach to zero trust really has always been from the start that we treat our internal network as if it was the internet. So in the simplest way to think about it, there is no perimeter. Or another way, everything is a perimeter. So it's that constantly to verify everything in your environment. And quite often we see that there's a lot of conversations about zero trust. It can be very different depending on the technical control and the aspect that you're talking about it. Lots of security companies love to talk about my version of zero trust. So you probably first, to your point, want to know what they're specifically talking about. But really for us, it's that constantly verify every connection and make sure that there's never anything that is just of a trust or privilege level that he's not being verified constantly.
So following on from that, how is that really different, I guess, to the legacy security models we may be used to in organizations?
Yes, you might have a traditional gateway security model, and everyone likes to draw the image of a moat around the castle, and the idea there that everything on the inside is trusted and everything on the outside is not trusted. But quite often what that's opening up is a lack of visibility and control for lateral movement within the moat. So to the example, once the raiders are in, they can go to the wine cellar, they can go to the watchtower, they can get all the way through the castle, and you actually don't know. And unfortunately, to some of the examples before, what we see quite often is when there has been a breach, and this is publicly reported quite often, it's been in the environment for a significant amount of time. If it hasn't been a ransomware event where it was money orientated to lock up for the purpose of gaining their funds, but quite often they will have been in the environment for 80 days, 200 days, and because what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to move low and slow through the environment, escalate their privileges, and basically they're looking for the pot of gold. But if you're not have visibility to constantly be checking every time they go through the next door or the next door or the next door, basically, they kind of are in, it's the fox in the hen house, but no one knows about it.
So Google itself went through a significant event that led to a move to zero trust and the evolution of BeyondCorp. Can you share with us a little bit about Google's journey and the events that occurred to result in someone like yourself representing a product, BeyondCorp?
Yeah, so we just passed the 10-year anniversary of Operation Aurora. So it's quite a well-publicized event where there were dozens of technology companies globally, which were the subject of a very sophisticated nation-state attack. Now, at the time, the co-founder of my division and other first responders, what we learned quite quickly was the attacker moved through the network. They used relatively common attack types. So I think, to the point that Simon was saying before, this wasn't highly sophisticated attack methods, even though they were a sophisticated attack group. So they were using the same type of techniques that everyone was using. They, executed a particular exploit. And at the end of the day, they effectively bypassed, the security best practices that we had well aligned and well controlled in place at the time. Now, what we as Google, and I love speaking to my co-founder about it, what we really took away from that is that it really did born two significant security initiatives. So number one, we had to detect everything in our environment. So that's not just the perimeter when they're jumping the fence, it's everything throughout the environment. And the second one is we had to trust nothing. So very much that really born BeyondCorp as a methodology. And really, as I said, that's how we treat our network, our internal network, like the public internet. So we replaced the traditional remote access solutions. We replaced the traditional cloud access security tools and gateways to basically allow any user to access any application from anywhere on virtually any device. And since its inception, that's been the goal. And so right now, me as a Google employee, I can successfully access, any corporate network from any corporate application from an untrusted network without the use of a traditional VPN.
So if you were to, start working with organisations, and as you do, how do you help organisations start a journey towards adapting to more of a zero trust model of security?
Yeah, so we initially will want to understand, I think to some of the examples that were shared before, what's a critical business need that we can help address? And that might be a specific application, which is, you might have contractors. I think that was, mentioned a few times. You don't want to necessarily give them full unfettered access to your VPN, or you don't want to necessarily have the additional investment cost to spin up another remote access solution for a subset of users to access one or two applications. So those are the types of use cases that we're working with organizations whereby, they're already, a lot of them are already using a Google Cloud product. So whether it be GCP or G Suite, in my specific example, or Chrome Enterprise, and then look at leveraging how can we then provide you an easily policy-based access on that. And I think that's the other thing for us is really at the end of the day, and I like, Declan's point about talking about people, all this is policy driven. So the simplest way we answer that is something like, do you have a group of contractors that you need to give access to a payroll tool or an internal tool, and that today they can't access? Because similarly with our example internally, when COVID hit, we'd already had the infrastructure set up in place, but we actually had some similar challenges to Arlene where we actually didn't have some hardware requirements. So suddenly we had people who were contractors, they had all of the access control, we had all the policies, but then we needed to, in some instances, make sure they had appropriate hardware to access their environment. But that's quite common, is the use case we'll talk to is a specific application for a subset of users rather than a carte blanche replacement of your entire infrastructure. Because to be transparent, this has been a journey for us. We've released 6 white paper research papers on our journey to BeyondCorp over about 4 years, and they go into quite a bit of detail of all the different considerations we've made internally. But it's really only been in the last 12 to 18 months where we've started to work with organizations, as you say, myself in my role, of how we now have productized offerings which we can help customers more easily consume. Because I think it was a bit of a Google awakening that, very googly for us to write a whole bunch of research papers and here you go, everyone, this is how to do it. But as I've been told many, many times, if it's not simple enough to deliver, then it kind of doesn't matter. And that's, I think, been a change in our philosophy, particularly as it comes to enterprise security. And I know there's been a lot of conversation around, we use the term internally of invisible security. And I think to what Corinne and what Declan was saying before, our internal drive is that you should be able to leverage a tool which has zero negative user experience, but the security should be built in by design. So, for us, we don't generally have hardening guides for our applications or here's how to make sure it's secure, because that's our bar. If we're not already there, then actually we don't want to, we need more work to do. And I think that's where, I'd say we Google are always thinking of that. But I think more collectively as an industry, we all need to collectively make sure that's the bar. So to the example before, which Corinne was talking about, we're not forcing our users to have a risk module themselves thinking about every click or every email. Or what I've seen personally is, I've got a bank account transfer and someone's just changed the details in the PDF. So suddenly, $200,000 has gone to the wrong bank account and it's gone. And all that was, a compromised email server somewhere. And then to the point before, same typeset, same PDF, same exact invoice, they just changed the bank details. So there's so many of those examples where we really all collectively need to raise that up.
One of the building blocks that you've spoken about previously with Zero Trust is the concept of context aware. And are you able to unpack that a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, so the way that we think about provisioning our remote access solution is ultimately users are accessing it through a browser. So obviously from Google, effectively Chrome is our endpoint. So it's the edge, the application. So whether it be an employee, a contractor, or even partners, that's their way into the environment. And then what they're actually accessing is a identity aware proxy. So first of all, we want to verify who you are, so we know, what your authenticated user group is, what access controls have been applied. Then we also provide a context-aware access. So what we're also then applying is geolocation blocking. So if you're a New Zealand company and you don't have any staff overseas, it's a simple determination to say that every user should only be accessing it from a local geo IP, and then also applying some device controls. So the example before, are they running on a supported device with an updated patch level and a particular operating system? And ultimately what all that boils down to is a very simple language of, I want my HR team to be able to access my internal HR application via this browser over on these supported operating systems and patch levels, and from New Zealand only. So that's the simplified version of the policy, and then that's actually what then gets applied and verified every single connection.
Thank you very much, Ben. Look, I'm going to go around the table and get a key point takeaway from all our panelists, and we might start with you, since you're holding the chair at the moment. What's one thing that you would say to our audience to take away from this conversation?
I think it's been great from my side to obviously, get an understanding of all the things that people are talking about. I think the biggest thing for me is reiterating what Simon talked about around, sometimes quite often it is that first step in security. So two-factor authentication, ensuring that as much as possible, we are trying to reduce the attack surface and reduce the risk profile. But to my example before, making it as easy as possible for your employees. So you need to do it in a way that's effectively invisible. If anything, we want to make their job easier and more secure.
Thank you. And maybe we'll go to Simon. What's the one nugget of advice that you'd give to the audience?
Yeah, I might steal Simon's one, and since Ben stole my one about using 2FA, is to test your BCP plan. So my friend who had got ransomware in the Optom practice, and he couldn't get his files back, he went to check on his backups and they'd been failing for 7 months. So at the moment where he needed it most and could have saved him $18,000, they weren't working. So check your backups and the rest of your BCP plan.
And I might follow this theme, Simon. Since Simon stole yours, what's?
I'm trying to think of somebody else's to steal. Well, I was going to say human layer was my focus, but after being told that technology should be providing something that humans don't have to work out whether to push the brake pedal, and it's still going to be a brake pedal next time I push it. I think really, to me, it's going to be about educating business people about this is real. And it's a little bit like buying insurance. Well, it hasn't happened to me yet, and sure, I read about it and all the rest of it, but working out what the right level of investment is, I think that's the biggest challenge that senior managers are going to have, is how much money do I invest into this space? Because it could be a bottomless pit. To make it completely secure is going to be a big effort. So what is the right level of acceptable security, I think, is the challenge that I've got working with senior managers in my past organisations. That's been the challenge I've got. I don't have the same challenge so much now, but I have in the past. So that's, I think, where we can educate people more.
Should we follow the bounce here, Declan?
Yeah. That's fascinating. I want to talk to you after that. How much security is right? There's a mission in there, right? Because no organization's mission is to be the most secure organization in the world, right? That's absurd. But anyway, that's not my takeaway. My takeaway, I'm gonna break the habit of everyone. I'm not gonna steal anyone else's thing. Use a password manager. Have one password per account that you create anywhere ever. Right? That sounds like a total nightmare, because it is. So use a password manager. It will remember them all for you. You only need to remember one to get into your password manager, and it will do that and back up your password manager.
Good point.
Can confirm.
Arlene, I'll hold the microphone for you. What's your one point of advice here?
only one. I guess what I've heard around the group, and as a chief executive, it's probably elevating it to my level and understanding that business and technology are not separate issues for a chief executive, and we really need to understand both so that we can drive the right outcome for organization. And that isn't always easy, but there's a lot of experts around this room that I will count on, and a lot of experts in my organization that I count on to give me the best advice so that I can make the right decisions and advise our board appropriately. So really good to hear the two-factor. Yes, we're trying to push two-factor. We want that, and we know it's not easy to drive. We know that it'll cost us, but we know it's the right thing to do. So just, again, making sure that the tech guys give me the right advice so I can make the right decision for the organization.
And Corinne, from a people change perspective?
So I think, the lockdowns that, everyone has been experienced forced people to be remote workers. But actually, if we take away that situation happened, employees are generally more productive and they're generally more engaged when they are given the flexibility to be able to work from wherever it is that they are. So probably it's not necessarily a key takeaway, but just a consideration that when you are looking at what your security needs to be within your organization, it's how are you going to have peace of mind to know that your device, your information is secure whilst empowering your users to have that productivity and that flexibility.
Very good. Well, before we wrap up, we do have some questions from online, and I would like to open that up to attendees here in Wellington. We'll just go through a couple of these online questions, and I think this might be a Simon and Declan question. From Jay Collins online, do you think the future of security operations will predominantly be remote going forward in New Zealand, or will on-site remain a standard operating model?
I don't know what reason security operations would need to be on site for.
I'm going to say remote. And the reason that I'm going to say remote is because A, that's where the users are going to be. And B, no one wants to sit in a box in the middle of the night waiting for something to happen. And I can say that as a person that's done my time doing incident response in a box underground waiting for something to happen. And so you have access to much better staff and much better staff and much more engaged staff when you're able to seek their expertise when you need it and not just have people sitting there. So yeah, I'm definitely going to say remote.
Very good. And actually, this one's for you, Ben, I think. We've got Mr. James Valentine, who's ex-Fronde and now at Fisher & Paykel. What should the expected time frame for a BeyondCorp Zero Trust transition be for a medium to large organisation?
Tricky question. Look, I don't think I can give an actual answer for that without knowing what applications and what the actual project would be. I would say, though, that we have some examples in the US where a customer through this environment, they were an existing G Suite customer and they moved to remote access for some on-prem web apps, and they did it in about 2 weeks across 180,000 employees. So we have had some examples where it has been days and weeks when some of the existing auth and infrastructure is already there. If it was a complete new zero trust journey, I would say very honestly, it's going to be a significant amount longer than that. And I think, our own experience of it being years and years is really the methodology we take. Is it's not a point project to design, scope, and deliver. It's a continual iteration and continual improvement. So sorry, I don't have a 4 weeks and this is how it works.
That's a perfect answer for Mr. Valentine, and I'm sure he'll appreciate that. Look, I'll open up to the floor here in Wellington. Do we have any questions out on the floor? If you'd like to put your hand up, I might wander over with the microphone. No questions? I think, based on the time, I'll say thank you very much for all in attendance. I hope the audience at home has got some value as much as those people here, and I welcome those people in Wellington to enjoy some more beverages and some nibbles here. And thank you very much again from Fronde.